Hi, my name is Ozzy, and welcome to the Pretend Gamer, where I'm supposed to be posting gameplay videos, but I haven't. Today I'm talking about a game that I think takes a little bit too much inspiration from Stardew Valley. We've seen this before with a game called Super Zoo Story, which has since changed a lot of its assets. I would like to add a disclaimer that this is just my opinion, and I'm talking about this because I want to know other people's opinions. We all know Stardew Valley, a game that was released by Concerned Ape in 2016 and was heavily inspired by Harvest Moon. It has seen a lot of popularity since its release, and I think it's a good example of how inspiration can lead to a new and exciting game. The game that we're going to be talking about today, my friend actually found on NextFest on Steam. It's called Isle of Elanor and is set to release in September of 2022 by Common Wombat. Looking at the pictures, me and my friend immediately noticed a similarity to this and Stardew Valley. About this game section says that this game borrows mechanics from Dwarf Fortress, Divinity Original Sin 2, Stardew Valley, and the Witcher series. According to a Reddit post that was posted 17 days ago as of making this video, this has been in the works for a year. The Reddit post also boasts some roguelike features that are a step away from Stardew Valley, and shown in the screenshot, it seems like the creator is trying to make a game that, gameplay-wise, is quite different from Stardew Valley. The issue lies, however, in the art style and the UI, which make the game look more like a Stardew Valley mod than a game of its own. It also is apparently supposed to be set in Middle-earth, which is copyrighted by the Tolkien estate, and this has been brought up multiple times. A Reddit post from a year ago when he first announced this, people questioned the legality of this and if he was even going to be able to pursue this project. He said that Tolkien had no legal basis to sue him or even a cease and desist because of the words Middle-earth. In the replies, he continues to say that he is completely in the clear for both Tolkien and Stardew Valley, especially since his game boasts a lot of different features and a completely different structure to Stardew Valley. He also welcomes people to find sprites that are changed just enough to get away with it, and I will get to that later in the video. Now, I didn't think this video would be fair if I didn't download the demo and play it a little bit, so I'm going to enter gameplay here. If you don't want to watch this, you can skip to this time mark. You wake up in a pretty familiar looking room, and I did skip literally all the storyline, and I just wanted to get outside and play a bit of the game. Now I'm going to reiterate again that this video is more focusing on the art style and the UI, and not the storyline and the gameplay features. However, the starting gameplay features are practically identical to Stardew Valley's, and the art style is very, very reminiscent of Stardew Valley. Here you can see me picking up debris just like you would in Stardew Valley. The biggest early game difference seems to be the combat. As you can see in the upper left hand corner, there's some funny little effects you can do. I did die immediately though, so I didn't really mess around with it. When it comes to gameplay, I do not think the creator of this game is trying to copy Stardew Valley one for one. There's a lot of added features such as encumbrance, factions and reputation, shields, the little effects I showed you while fighting, as well as abilities and stats that you can choose in the beginning, similar to D&D. The main issue lies in the storyline, but not for Stardew Valley. The storyline is completely different from Stardew Valley. However, in a post he made when he first announced the game, he called it a novella and game set in Middle-earth called the Isle of Elanor, which, as you know, Middle-earth is copyrighted by the Tolkien estate. And even on his website, which we'll talk more about later, he does state that he was inspired and wanted to set the story in Middle-earth, and he decided to write a video game as a companion work to the story. And like I mentioned before, when people brought up the legality of using Middle-earth, he said that he would be perfectly fine, and that Tolkien doesn't have a copyright on Middle-earth. He told the person that they were very snarky, and told them to have a good day. However, personally, I don't think this is going to go the way the creator thinks it will, as he has stated multiple times that he wants this set in Middle-earth, and has it even on his website. I think that there is a basis for Tolkien estate to serve him a cease and desist and tell him to change the storyline, or at least the setting. But now on to the important part of this video, Stardew Valley, and the similarities I found in the art style and the UI of Stardew Valley and Isle of Elanor. In fact, the creator is perfectly aware of the similarities, even though he says it's not a problem. And the reason I know he's perfectly aware is because he has a whole section on his website dedicated to how he isn't actually impeding on Stardew Valley's intellectual property. And we are going to go through this post piece by piece because I think it's really interesting, and I think he shoots himself in the foot a couple of times. He goes on to say that parts of Isle of Elanor are based on the games Stardew Valley and Harvest Moon, and I personally think there's nothing wrong with inspiration as long as the resulting content is something distinguishable from the source. He goes on to say that he decided to follow the user interface of Stardew Valley because the design simply works, and that it's the easy part of programming a game. He does say that at some point he will rework areas of the UI. But then he goes on to say that there are clear aesthetic differences between the user interface and the art styles of his game in Stardew Valley. So I pulled up the UI for his game and the UI for Stardew Valley. The only difference is the color palette and some changes he made to better suit his game. But I don't think that that should find its way into the demo, which is supposed to be a playable version of a game, especially when it's that similar to Stardew Valley's. He then goes on to talk about the gameplay, which I did talk about earlier in this video. The next thing he says is probably what I disagree with the most in this blog. He says that using a standard color palette without plain art assets, it's physically impossible to make a game with a farming mechanic with 16 pixel tiles that doesn't look in some part like Stardew Valley. He compares this with defying the laws of physics and says that it explains why many Stardew Valley game assets look like assets from Harvest Moon. I don't know which Harvest Moon game he means, because Harvest Moon has a very distinct style. He also says that this explains why the farming aspects of a game like Core Keeper look like Stardew Valley. Now, we will actually be looking at Core Keeper later in the video because he brings it up a second time. He then goes on to make a very bad comparison, which will be very ironic later. He goes on to compare these two beds, one from Harvest Moon and one from Stardew Valley, and poses the question which bed is from which. However, to me, the difference is very noticeable in not only the proportions of the bed, but also the shading style and, even though he said it was a standard color palette, he goes on to say that the only artistic difference between the two is that the lower graphic uses a black outline and that they could both fit into each game. And I completely disagree with that. Again, the rendering style of the shading, the proportions are all different, and I could immediately clock out that the second bed was from Harvest Moon, even though I've never actually played that specific Harvest Moon game. He then uses this to compare his rocks and his sticks to Stardew Valley's rocks and sticks. And I do think that the sticks bear a very close resemblance, but the rocks don't. However, the rock also ends up being ironic. Back on Reddit, he goes on to say that the art style for Isle of Elanor differs from Stardew Valley, and any person who is a pixel artist could see that. Well, as an artist myself, I don't think changing the colors and other differences makes an art style different. He also continues to say that the Stardew Valley style has more bling. I'm not actually really sure what that means, and that many people have told him that they see the differences, which is a weird argument because many people have also told him that they don't see the differences. He again says it's physically impossible to make pixel games not look like each other, and links some pixel games that he compares to looking like Stardew Valley, like his game looks like Stardew Valley. So let's take a look at the first one. The first one is Core Keeper. Remember how I said we were going to circle back to it? Well, this is the art style for Core Keeper. In my opinion, it looks nothing like Stardew Valley. While you may confuse Isle of Elanor for a mod for Stardew Valley, you would never confuse this game for Stardew Valley, and you would just simply think it's another pixel art game. And let's take a closer look at the farming, which he claimed earlier bears a close similarity to Stardew Valley's. However, I think that Core Keepers is a lot more mystical, and the style varies a lot from Stardew Valley's farming. Let's take a look at the second game he links that has a close similarity to Stardew Valley, except that you'll notice that it's not actually a game, it's just a town that somebody made, and in my opinion, it resembles the old RPG Maker games way more than it resembles Stardew Valley. I don't think this looks like Stardew Valley at all, actually. And last but not least, let's take a look at the game that he says has a very similar HUD and toolbar, and that is Seablip. This is the HUD for one of the parts of Seablip. The art style and the HUD here look nothing like Stardew Valley's. In this screenshot, you can see a better look at the toolbar and HUD that I think he is saying is similar to Stardew Valley's. However, I think that the HUD here is more similar to Stardew Valley's in terms of concept rather than the actual execution of the toolbar. However, in Isle of Elanor, you'll notice that the toolbar and HUD here are very similar in the execution. In fact, the toolbar has the same inset on the icons, the same amount of icons, as well as the same sort of border around it that Stardew Valley has. But so far, all of this has just been similarities, so I'm going to move on to specific game assets now. Back to the Reddit post, specifically this reply where he says that none of the sprites from his game are from Stardew Valley, and that the sprite comparisons have been very thorough. He welcomed this person to find a single sprite from his game that's from Stardew Valley, and that he'll remove it. He goes on to say that his cursor is the most similar, but it is different, and uses the same excuse that 16-pixel art is hard to make different. He goes on to say that the animations are also different, and he links that same page I was talking about before, where he says that he didn't impede on Stardew Valley's intellectual property. Now, I don't know if he actually expected anybody to take him up on this challenge, but as an artist myself, and somebody who has way too many hours in Stardew Valley, I actually noticed some similarities that were a little too suspicious. Let's take a look at this sprite, which is on the home page of his website and is made using his character creator. Now, I will give him credit that this sprite I found is actually not from Stardew Valley. I did notice, however, that it looks a little bit too much like this mod for Stardew Valley called Enhanced Player Sprites that came out in 2018, well before he started working on this game. So I opened up my drawing program, layered the two on top of each other, and found that his sprite looks like it is just a slightly stretched out and taller version of the Enhanced Player Sprite from this mod for Stardew Valley. That wasn't the only thing I noticed, however. You remember when I said that the bedpost was going to be pretty ironic? Well, I noticed something when I loaded into his, and lo and behold, on my art program, I layered over the single bed in Stardew Valley on top of his bed, and as you can see, on the sheet, the shading is practically identical, to the point where I don't think this was a coincidence. As I played, and also I took a little look into his files, I continued to find things that were too close, in my opinion, to be a coincidence. Remember the rocks that I said would be ironic? Well, it is a different set of rocks, but I took the rocks that drop when you mine them, flipped the Stardew Valley one, and when you layer them over each other, there is about an 85% match of pixels, down to that little shading dot under the highlight. Looking into his files, I also noticed that the fence post looks eerily similar, down to the shading under it. And as I was playing, I also noticed that the trees looked pretty similar. Most of these trees look practically identical, and before the same excuse arises that 16-bit pixels are just hard to make look different, I actually went out of my way to find some trees that are 16-bit pixel that I think look vastly different from Stardew Valley. Here we have a stock photo of some pixel trees which look very different, and I think they look very cute. We have these trees from an ARPG called Pale Midorian, if I'm correct, that I don't think has had any progress since 2016, but they also look quite different from Stardew Valley's. This example may be a little bit odd because it's actually Super Sue's story. Now, after the controversy, they changed a lot of their pixel art, and the trees actually look pretty unique now, and I actually really like them. That said, I think that the art style, especially some specific assets, and the UI is way too close to Stardew Valley in my opinion. As an artist, as I've said before, and an aspiring game dev, I just think that this is way too close and isn't something he should release, specifically because I think that there would be a legal basis for Concerned Ape to serve him a cease and desist, and if he didn't take it down, to even sue him, because this isn't just a passion project, he does plan on making money from this. He has a link to a Kickstarter he plans on launching, and in the picture he's using, it has the same assets that I've talked about in this video that I think are way too close to be coincidences. The Reddit post, he says that he might be pricing at around $20, the price of 2 lattes, and real quick, I just want to ask, has anybody ever bought a latte for $10? The most I've spent on a latte is about $6. But either way, I don't think he should release this game in the state it's in. Maybe the assets plan on changing, but a demo is supposed to be a look into what the full version of the game is going to look like, meaning you shouldn't have assets that are this similar or almost blatant ripoffs of another game. Even though a lot of these assets aren't one-for-one copies, he even states here that he didn't have any assets, that he just changed a couple of sprites enough to get away with it. And he welcomed this person to find sprites that he changed just enough to get away with it. And I think in this video, I might have done that. If you watched this video all the way through, I commend you, and I want to know in the comments what you think of this. And also, if you like this video, you probably shouldn't bother subscribing. I don't know if I'll ever make another video after this. Oh, also, side note, I did look at the animation side by side, and they do look fairly different, so I didn't bring them into this video, just because I didn't think they were close enough for me to warrant making a whole big deal about it, like the other assets that I brought in. Anyway, I hope you have a nice day, and like I said, I would love to hear what you think about this.